this couldn't be happening.
You're the ugly duckling. Hide that face. That's what I heard at the ball. While my cousin laughed, my friends pretended to pity me, and my sabotaged dress became a spectacle. I wanted to disappear, until Lucien de Vera crossed the room. The mob boss I'd saved months earlier, pinned a brooch to my chest and called me his queen. It was just a favor returned. A charade with a deadline, a price, and a risk. But when Lucien looked at me as if I were already his, I understood. The ball was only the beginning. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, Borrowed Dress, Sharp Laughter. Saturday morning began with the smell of reheated coffee and the sound of the studio's old sewing machine choking on the third buttonhole. I'd been sewing since 6. My middle finger already ached at the spot where the needle always grazed, and I didn't even notice anymore. The window light came in slanted, hitting the wooden workbench scarred with scissor marks, making the white lint floating in the air shimmer. The studio was small. 3 machines in a row, a one-armed mannequin in the corner, and the smell of new fabric mixed with the dust that never left the corners no matter how much we swept. Dahlia came in shoving the door open with her hip, 2 paper coffee cups balanced in her hands. Good morning, slave of the thread. I brought you poison in liquid form, she said, pushing one of the cups across the table. And I brought gossip, which is worse. I lifted my eyes from the hem. Dahlia had a way of entering rooms like someone throwing a rock into a calm lake. 24 years old, loud laugh, no filter at all between brain and mouth. She was the only person at the studio who called me by my full name when she was mad. What gossip? Your cousin stopped by the laundromat on the corner last night. Asking about you. I felt my stomach drop 2 floors. Selena Morcant never asked about me. Selena ordered, sent messages, left notes at the studio's front desk in that rounded handwriting she'd learned at the expensive school. Asking in person where I was, that was work she didn't do. Asking what? Whether you had a dress for Saturday. I squeezed the thread between my fingers harder than I needed to. Dahlia sat on the edge of the table, swung her legs, blew on her own coffee. The steam rose between us like a thin curtain. And she said she'd lend you one, that she'd do your makeup, that she'd take you to the Bella Vita ball by car. All of that came out of her mouth in that sugary voice she uses when she's poisoning somebody. Maybe she just wants to be nice. Dahlia looked at me the way you look at a child defending a rabid dog. Emily, your cousin has never been nice. Not to her own mother, not to her dog, not to me, and I'm just background noise in your lives. I knew. I'd known since I was 12, when Selena ripped a dress my mother had sewn for me and said, in front of the whole family, that poor relatives shouldn't try to compete. I'd known since I was 15, when Selena's father called my father's boss, and my father came home with no job and no real understanding of what had happened. I'd known since I was 19, when my mother died without the treatment we could never afford, and Selena sent white flowers with a card that read, in rounded letters, "So sorry for your loss, darling." I knew, but even so, standing there with the coffee cup warming my palm, I thought about my father's leaky roof dripping into the blue plastic basin, and I thought about the steady drip of that drop all night long, and I thought that if I went to that ball, maybe I'd meet people who needed a seamstress, maybe I'd hand out cards, maybe I'd come back with work. I'm going, I said. Dahlia let out a heavy sigh and dropped her head into her hands. Are you going because you're foolish, or because you still believe family blood means something? I'm going because the roof leaks. She looked at me in silence for a second. Her silence was worse than any curse word. Then she grabbed her cup, stood up, and kissed the top of my head. All right, but I want a full report on Sunday. If that snake pulls anything, you swear you'll tell me. I swore. I went back to the hem. The needle pricked my finger, and a tiny drop of blood stained the white fabric. I licked my finger, rubbed the spot with saliva, and kept going. Blood on white fabric I could get out with my eyes closed. It was the only stain my mother taught me how to handle before she died. I left the studio in the late afternoon, caught the bus, crossed a few neighborhoods, and got off 2 blocks from my father's house. The sky was lead gray, and the wind off the lake slid under my coat as if it knew the way. The roof, I looked at it from a distance before going in, still had the same crack in the right corner. My father was in the kitchen, glasses crooked, reading a 3-day-old newspaper. You going out, sweetheart? I'm going to Selena's ball. He raised his eyes from the paper slowly. My father was in his 60s, shoulders slumped, hands that trembled a little when he held a cup. He'd been let go from 3 jobs in the past 2 years. The last time, I knew, because of a phone call from the Morcant family. What for? Maybe I'll pick up clients for the studio. He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. My father had learned long ago that arguing with me about Selena was arguing with a closed door. Come home early. That was the only thing he said. I kissed his forehead, caught the smell of cheap soap and old tobacco, grabbed the small worn leather purse, and left. Selena had sent a cab to wait for me on the corner. Dry luxury, the kind she paid for just to make clear who was paying. I got in without saying anything to the driver. The drive up to the High District was short. Streets climbing, cleaner streetlights, the smell of the lake falling behind. Selena's house sat in a high-end neighborhood, with an electric gate and a garden stitched by hands paid by the hour. The maid let me in without greeting me, without even letting her eyes touch me. I climbed the marble staircase, and Selena was in the dressing room with her hair already done, lips painted deep red, kissing her own reflection in the mirror. "Cousin," she spread her arms without standing up. "You took forever. I was starting to think you'd given up. I got here at the time we agreed on. Did you really?" She glanced at her wristwatch, made a pout. "How forgetful of me. Look, I set your dress aside on that hanger over there. It was what I had left. Something came up with the one I was going to give you." The hanger held a mustard-colored dress, with the hem frayed on one side, and a small, round, dark stain near the hip. The kind of fabric that hung limp, no shape, drooping shoulders. The kind of dress nobody would wear to the bakery, let alone to a Bella Vita ball. "Selena, I know," she cut in before I could even start. "It's far from ideal, but you're so creative, darling. You'll figure something out. The makeup artist is waiting for you in the other room. Go on, go." The makeup artist was Selena's friend. She worked on my face without looking at me, in silence, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The brush moved across my skin with the hurry of someone who just wanted to finish. When she stopped, my left eye had liner running down to my cheekbone, and my lipstick was a shade of pink that didn't match anything wearable. I looked in the mirror and almost cried right there. "All done," the makeup artist said. "Gorgeous." Selena appeared behind me in the mirror, already in her silver gown, shining from root to hem. "Oh my God, Emily, you look so dramatic." "I love it." I put on the mustard dress. The fabric rasped against my skin like fine sandpaper. I slipped into the shoes she gave me, one size too small, and felt my heel compress before I'd even taken a step. I came down the stairs like someone walking to the gallows, counting the steps to keep from thinking about anything else. Selena laughed at her own joke at the door, opened the car for me, turned the radio up loud so we wouldn't have to talk on the way. The Bella Vita mansion glowed from the street, yellow lights in every window, garden lined with torches, white-gloved valets waiting in a row. Selena got out first, paused at the top of the staircase to be looked at, and let me come down behind her like a shopping bag she'd forgotten to hand to the maid. The ballroom had a soaring ceiling, heavy chandeliers, white marble streaked with gray. Couples chatted in clusters. Waiters circled with softly clinking glasses. The air smelled of expensive perfume mixed with chilled champagne and candle wax, and I, in that stained mustard dress, with the shoe biting my heel, shrank the way I'd shrunk my whole life. Selena dragged me by the elbow, to a group of 4 women standing near a column. 3 faces I didn't know. The 4th I did. It was her usual friend, the platinum blonde one, the one I'd seen in every photo. "Girls," Selena said, "this is Emily, my little cousin. I brought her because she hardly ever goes out, poor thing. She lives locked up in a studio." Polite laughter. Looks from head to toe, lingering on all the wrong places, on the stain at the hip, on the tight shoe, on the smudged eyeliner. The platinum friend leaned toward me, stretched out a perfect red-nailed finger, and tipped my chin. She lifted my face slowly, the way someone inspects a piece of fruit at the market. "What an interesting little thing," she said, drawing the word out. "You're the ugly duckling of the family, aren't you? Look at that face. You should hide it, darling. Really, you should hide that face." The group laughed together. It was a single laugh, synchronized, maybe rehearsed. Selena laughed louder than the others, throwing her head back the way she did in photos. I didn't answer, not because I had the strength, because my throat had closed. I felt the heat climb up my neck, my ears, my forehead. I felt the smudged liner slide down another millimeter. I felt the tight shoe become a small knife at my heel. I felt again, 12 years old, the dress being torn in front of the whole family. I turned. I walked across the ballroom without looking at anyone, without hearing whatever continued to be said behind me. I found a side door cracked open behind a heavy dark velvet curtain. I pushed it, crossed it, stepped out onto the terrace. It was large, long, with a stone balustrade and a view of a dark garden dotted with low little lights. The air out there was cold enough to make my shoulders shiver inside the limp fabric. I planted both hands on the cold stone, lowered my head, and let the first tear fall straight onto the marble, opening a dark round mark the size of a coin. That was when I heard it. "Are you all right, miss?" The voice came from the other side of the terrace. Low, slow, in no hurry. A voice that didn't expect a quick answer, that didn't ask the question out of politeness. I raised my head slowly and made out only the silhouette of a man leaning against the balustrade on the other side, in a black tuxedo, an unlit cigarette between long fingers. I couldn't see his face clearly yet. The light from the garden torches reached only halfway to where he stood. But something in that voice, something about the way he pronounced miss, as if it were a promise and not a greeting, ran down my spine like a shiver I already knew. I'd heard that voice before, on a rainy night, in the back of a laundromat, and the man it belonged to was bleeding. Chapter 2. Black Diamond Brooch. It took me 3 seconds to process. 3 seconds staring at his silhouette against the dark garden. 3 seconds for my eyes to adjust to the terrace's faint light, and 3 seconds for the face from memory to lock into the face in front of me. It was him, cleaner, more whole, without the blood at his ribs, without the torn coat, without the look of a man about to pass out at any second. But it was him, the same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same way of looking at someone like he was studying what he was about to buy. That night, months ago, I'd been pulling a double shift at the laundromat, where I picked up odd jobs before the studio finally hired me. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that came in through the cracks in the back door and pooled on the concrete floor. I was closing up the back when I heard the sound of a body leaning against the wall. I thought it was a drunk. It was a wounded man. I looked both ways down the street, saw the shape of a car parked further up with men inside it, and did the stupidest thing of my life. I pushed him inside, locked the door, and told him to stay quiet. I didn't ask his name. I cleaned the blood from his ribs with a dish towel. I stitched the lining of his coat with the thick needle I used for floor rags, and his hands were so cold I ended up rubbing my palms against his between stitches. When he tried to pay me, I said money from a bleeding man wasn't worth anything, and I pushed the bill back into his hand. He left before dawn. I never told anyone. I looked at him now, on the terrace, and my whole body remembered before my head did. "Are you all right, miss?" he repeated lower. "I am," I lied. He pushed off the balustrade, took 3 steps toward me, stopped. I saw the perfect black tuxedo, the unwrinkled white shirt, the watch worth a whole month of my salary. I also saw the faint mark of someone who slept very little, the shadow under the eyes no man's makeup could hide. Behind him, the Bella Vita garden breathed in a cold scent of boxwood and wet stone, and somewhere inside the house a waltz was starting up again, muffled by the curtain. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "I do now. Did you know that night?" "No." He nodded, slowly. He seemed satisfied with the answer, or relieved, or both. He took the unlit cigarette from his mouth and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, as though it were something a child had forgotten. "Do you still patch up broken men?" The question came with a half-smile I hadn't expected from his mouth. It was so far from the tone of the night, so far from the tone of the ball, so far from the tone of me crying against the balustrade, that my mouth laughed before my head gave it permission. It was a short, surprised laugh, and I shut my mouth right away. He noticed, and filed it away. "Who made you cry?" he said, low, and the sentence came out without a question mark. "No one." I wiped my face with the back of my hand and felt the eyeliner smear at my knuckle. "I came here on my own." "Who made you cry?" he repeated, and his voice dropped a tone. I looked at him and thought about lying again. I thought about the quiet life I had on the other side of that door, about the studio that would open on Monday, about the bus I'd take back to my father's house. I thought that men like him didn't enter the lives of women like me for free, and that everything that came for free later charged interest. But the mustard dress pinched at the hip, the shoe was biting my heel, and the smudged liner had nearly reached my mouth. And he was looking at me like none of it was shameful. It was 4 women. One is my cousin. Another one touched my face and said I'm the ugly duckling of the family. She said I should hide my face. He went quiet for a second. His jaw hardened in a minimal way, almost invisible. His hands stayed in his pockets. There was no shout, no broad gesture, nothing beyond that tiny hardening at the jaw. and the way his shoulder dropped a half millimeter, like a man deciding something without needing to announce it. Where are they now? Inside. Let's go in. I shook my head. I'm not going back in there. It's enough. He took another step, stopped at exactly the distance where I could smell his jacket. Something clean, woodsy, without any sweetness. He raised his hand, and for a second I thought he was going to touch my face. He didn't. He brought the hand to his own chest, unpinned the brooch from his tuxedo lapel, and held it out to me. It was a heavy brooch, a black diamond at the center, set in old, darkened silver, with small notches along the edge that caught the yellow terrace light and threw it back in fragments. I'd seen similar designs in magazines, designs printed under a name, and the name was always the same, and the name was De Vera. I can't accept that. You're not going to accept it. You're going to wear it. Give it back later if you want. I'm not going back in there with this on my chest. Yes, you are. His voice stayed low. You're going to walk in there with me, cross that ballroom without shrinking, and when we pass your cousin, you're going to look straight ahead. I'll handle the rest. Why? He looked at me a second longer than he needed to. Because you didn't ask the name of the man who was bleeding. He didn't say anything else. He lifted the brooch himself, and before I could react, he pinned it to the crooked neckline of the mustard dress. His fingers brushed the skin at my collarbone for an instant. Cold, firm, and I held my breath without meaning to. It was 1 second. It was 1 second that hurt, and I couldn't have said where. He stepped back. He held out his arm. Lucien de Vera, he said, in case you were still in doubt. I wasn't in doubt. I placed my hand on his arm. I felt, beneath the expensive fabric, the muscle of a man who hadn't been built to wear a tuxedo. We walked to the heavy curtain. He pushed it aside. We went in. The ballroom didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in waves. First the table closest to the side door, then the middle cluster, where a waiter froze with his tray tilted and a glass almost tipping, then Selina, who had her back turned, and who felt, before turning around, that something had shifted. When Selina turned, the color drained from her cheek in real time. I saw it. It was the first genuinely good thing that had happened to me all night. Lucien walked through the center of the ballroom with me, in no hurry at all. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight ahead, but his hand covered mine on his arm and stayed there, heavy, warm, as if he were closing a door behind the two of us. With the brooch on my chest, the shoe cutting into me, the smudged liner, I crossed that ballroom like someone walking down a long corridor of people who had stopped existing. The platinum friend stepped into our path. She tried to smile, opened her mouth to speak. Lucien stopped 3 steps from her, looked at her. He didn't say a name, didn't say a title, didn't offer a greeting. Anyone who laughs at her, he said, and his voice didn't rise a millimeter, laughs at me. The platinum friend swallowed dry. The smile died at the corner of her mouth, and her right-hand fingers closed around the strap of her clutch, as if that were the only safe thing in the room. Selina appeared behind her friend's shoulder, hands clasped in front of her body, trying to look like she still owned the moment. Lucien, what a surprise. I didn't know you knew my little cousin. He didn't look at Selina. He looked at the hostess, Mrs. Bellavita, who was 3 meters away, frozen with her glass in hand. A beautiful ball, he said. I'm sorry to leave early. Miss Vane isn't feeling well. Miss Vane. I had never heard anyone call me that. It rang loud, round, definitive, and it filled a space at the pit of my stomach I hadn't known was empty. The hostess opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and managed a small nod. Lucien walked me through the ballroom to the main door in no hurry at all. Behind us, no one was breathing properly. I didn't look back. I didn't look at Selina. I looked straight ahead, the way he'd told me to, and the tight shoe, in that moment, hurt less than it had all night. On the curb, the outside air struck cold on the skin at my collar, and a black armored car was waiting at the curb with the engine low. A tall man in a dark suit, sharp eyes under the brim of his cap, opened the back door without a word. Lucien helped me in, walked around the car, sat down on the other side. Maddox, Lucien said to the driver, Miss is going to give you the directions. Yes, sir. I murmured my father's address, and Maddox simply nodded. The car moved. I looked out the window and saw the lights of the Bellavita mansion shrink, stretched in the glass like yellow streaks blinking out one by one. I looked at the brooch on my chest, heavy, cold. I looked at the man beside me, who had opened his jacket and was looking out the window with the same calm expression of someone who'd just finished the paper. Why me? I asked quietly. He took his time. Because it was you. He didn't add anything. Maddox watched us in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine for a second, and he politely looked away. If you say so, sir. Maddox murmured, without anyone having asked. Lucian almost smiled. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. The car stopped at my father's curb. Maddox got out, opened my door. Lucian didn't get out with me. He just tilted his head toward me from the window and said, "Sleep. I'll see you." I had no answer to that. I got out. The car circled around and disappeared at the corner before I reached the door, and the woodsy scent of his jacket lingered a second longer on the fabric of my dress. I went up to my room without turning on the light, without waking my father, without taking off the mustard dress. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the frame creak quietly under my weight. I unpinned the brooch with a trembling hand, held it in my palm, and looked at it in the faint streetlight coming through the window. Black diamond, heavy, cold. I'd paid off a debt without knowing it, and I'd just opened another one I couldn't yet read. Chapter 3. The man with the torn sleeve Monday arrived gray in Chicago, the way only Chicago knows how to be gray, with that low fog that slips in through the window crack and leaves the smell of rain stuck to the apron. I tried to pretend Saturday hadn't happened. I sewed the wrong hem 3 times before noon, and on the 4th try, I realized I was pulling the thread too hard, as if I were trying to yank Saturday out of the fabric along with it. On the 5th, Dahlia stopped in front of my table with the expression of someone about to tell me the world had ended overnight. "You need to see something," she said, without her usual smile. I left the studio with her tugging at my sleeve. My father's neighborhood was 3 blocks away. 3 blocks that day felt like 30. I recognized the house before we got close. I recognized it because the roof was whole for the first time in 3 winters. The dark shingles still gleamed, they were so new, lined up as if someone had spent the night up there, measuring each one with a ruler. The smell of fresh tar rose from the eaves, mixed with the smell of the coffee the neighbor brewed every morning on his porch. "There's no receipt," Dahlia warned quietly. "Your father told me. They showed up before dawn, finished before breakfast. Nobody asked for a signature. Nobody left a card. They were gone before the rooster crowed." I didn't answer. I felt the black diamond brooch in the pocket of my dress, wrapped in a handkerchief, as if it weighed more than the whole house. The metal was cold even pressed against my body, and for a moment I thought it was burning through the cloth. I went back to the studio in silence. Dahlia walked beside me saying things I couldn't hear, words that dissolved in the sound of our shoes on the wet sidewalk. I sat at my table, opened the thread box, closed the thread box. I stared at the white wall where Dahlia had taped up a calendar from the year before and never changed. On Wednesday, the studio phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. It was my father. His voice was different, lighter, the way it got when my mother was still alive and he'd come home humming. "They called me back," he said. "My old boss. He said there was a misunderstanding a while back. I start again Monday." I swallowed hard before answering. The line between us crackled faintly, as if the whole city were listening. "That's good, Dad. You know something about this, Emily? I know you deserve it," I said, and hung up before my voice could give me away. Dahlia looked at me over the sewing machine without saying a word. It was the first time I'd ever seen Dahlia not say a word. She just raised an eyebrow and went back to the navy fabric she was cutting. The sound of the pedal filled the studio, rhythmic, patient, like a clock that knew more than it let on. On Thursday, he showed up. I was alone in the studio, near the end of the day, when the bell at the door rang. I didn't look up right away. I recognized the step before I recognized the shadow. A heavy, calm step. The step of a man who had never had to hurry because the world always waited. "Mr. Vane?" his voice asked, with a polite irony that made me look up. Lucian de Vera was standing at the fabric counter, dark coat buttoned to his neck, right sleeve torn from elbow to cuff. The tier was too clean, too straight. A seamstress recognizes a cut made on purpose before she recognizes her own name. "Do you take rush jobs, miss?" he went on. I crossed my arms over my apron. "I take whoever knocks on the door." The door was open. "The bell isn't an invitation. It's a warning." He kept a smile inside. I saw the corner of his mouth move a millimeter and settle back. Lucian took a step back, walked out of the studio, closed the door carefully. He knocked 3 times, slowly. Each knock echoed against the wooden counter, as if the whole house had paused to listen. "May I come in now, Miss Vane?" The laugh nearly escaped me. I pressed my lips together. "You may." He came in again, torn coat draped over his arm, and approached the counter as if crossing a ballroom. He laid the coat in front of me with the same gesture he probably used to lay pistols on conference tables. I didn't think about the gesture then. I thought about it later. "How long?" he asked. "How long what?" "To fix it. How long do you intend to sit on my stool?" "As long as it takes." I pointed at the wooden stool in the corner without saying anything else. He sat. The stool was too small for a man his size, and even so, he settled his shoulders as if the piece of furniture had been made to measure. I picked up the coat. I felt the weight of the fabric, the softness of expensive wool, the silk lining that probably cost more than the studio's rent. A subtle scent rose from the collar. Cedar, old paper, something bitter underneath. I didn't comment. "New roof," I said, without lifting my eyes from the stitching. My father called back to his job. "You've been generous this week." "I don't know what you're talking about, miss." "You do." "I do." I lifted my face. He was staring at me with that calm of a man who doesn't negotiate because he doesn't have to. The studio's dim light caught the corner of his jaw and ran down to his collar, marking a thin scar I'd never noticed. I forced my eyes back to the sleeve. "Why?" "Because the roof leaked," he answered, low. "Because your father was good at what he did, and was fired over gossip from people who've never worked a day in their lives. Because I can, and a man who can and doesn't is the kind of man I've buried." The needle stopped in the air between my fingers. It was the first time he'd given me an answer that weighed more than the question. I didn't know what to do with it. I went back to stitching. "You can't buy my gratitude by fixing my father's roof." "I'm not buying anything." "You're paying." "No, you're paying for the night at the laundromat." He was quiet for a second. He tilted his head slowly. "If I were paying for the night at the laundromat, Miss Vane, you wouldn't be hemming for anyone anymore." I felt the blood climb up my neck. I gripped the needle between my fingers harder than I needed to. I stitched 3 more stitches without breathing. "Hand me the black thread," I said. "That box there, the middle one." He stood without complaining, walked to the shelf. The floorboards creaked under his shoe in a way they never creaked under mine. He came back with the wrong box. Navy blue thread. He set it in front of me with the seriousness of a man delivering a state document. "That's blue. It's dark. There's plenty of light in here, Mr. De Vera. It's blue." He looked at the box, at me, at the box again. He didn't apologize. He got up again, swapped it for the black one, and sat back down. I threaded the needle in 3 seconds and went back to the stitching. "You could teach me, miss, to pick out thread colors, to thread a needle." I lifted my head thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He was holding a new needle between his fingers, a piece of black thread in the other hand, as serious as if he were holding the key to a vault. "You're serious?" "I am." I pushed the spool aside, sighed. "Hand it over." He passed it. Our fingers met for half a second on the box. I didn't look. Neither did he. It was a silent pact to pretend that half second hadn't counted, even though the warmth of his skin stayed on mine longer than it should have. "Look," I said, showing him slowly. "You cut the end of the thread straight, not crooked. You wet it lightly." He wet it. It was the most absurd thing in the world to watch the most feared man in Chicago licking the tip of a sewing thread with the concentration of a kid at a math test. He tried, missed the eye, tried again, on the outside of the needle, as if the needle had 2 sides. "From the other side," I said. "This is the other side. That's the outside." "Needles have an outside?" The laugh caught me off guard. It came out before I could swallow it. Short, low, but it came out. He paused with the thread in midair and looked at me like a man who'd just found gold at the bottom of a creek no one had looked at in years. "That laugh," he said quietly, "is what I came here for." I felt my face burn. I took the needle from his hand, threaded it myself, handed it back. "Keep going." He kept going. He stitched 3 crooked stitches, 2 straight ones, and one that looked like a knot. I undid everything without looking at his face, and redid it in half the time. We worked in silence for a stretch I couldn't measure. Outside, a streetcar creaked past on the rails, the sound coming in through the window like a warning nobody knew how to read. The light outside began to turn orange. The bell rang once. Someone came in to pick up a dress and left. Lucian didn't move. He stayed on the stool, just watching my hands now. "My father slept less than I do," he said suddenly, without moving his gaze. "He woke up before dawn drinking black coffee. He said a man who sleeps doesn't control." I stopped the needle in midair. "And do you sleep?" "No." "Why?" "Because he was right from the wrong side." I didn't ask anything else. I felt that asking would be pushing on a door he was opening on his own, at his own pace. I stitched the last stitch. I cut the thread with my teeth, the way my mother taught me to cut when the scissors were far away. The thread snapped dry between my teeth, and I saw his gaze follow the gesture before dropping to the floor. "There," I said. He picked up the coat, put it on without standing up. The sleeve was perfect. He rotated his arm once in the air, confirming. "You've got a surgeon's hands, miss. I've got a seamstress's hands. Surgeons make more. Surgeons make more mistakes." I stared at him. He stared back. The joke hung in the air without either of us explaining it. Lucian stood up finally. It was strange to see that man on his feet inside the small studio. His head nearly grazed the bar of the light fixtures, and his shadow covered half the back wall. He took a folded bill from the inside pocket of his coat and set it on the counter before I could open my mouth. For the repair, that's more than a month's rent. It's the rush rate. I don't have a rush rate. You do now. He walked to the door. I held the bill between my fingers, not knowing whether to give it back or keep it. Before opening, he turned. His hand rested on the handle, not turning it, as if still deciding whether he was really going to leave. Miss Vane. What? Be careful these next few days. Chicago's been loud. The sentence came in through the door before I could ask what it meant. The bell rang. He left. I stood there with the bill in my fingers, looking at the empty stool, the little piece of black thread forgotten in the wrong box. Dahlia appeared at the back doorway. She must have heard everything from the storeroom. Honey, she said, crossing her arms. Mr. Expensive Coat is a goner. He came to fix a sleeve. He came to fix you. I didn't answer. I put the black thread back where it belonged. I put the bill inside the spool box, under 2 white skeins no one would touch. I tucked the laugh into a place inside my chest I didn't yet know how to name. When I left the studio, it was already night. The street was empty the way a Chicago street goes empty before something happens. No barking dog, no lit window, no sound of the elevated train that usually cut through at that hour. I noticed, across the street, a dark car pulled up at the curb, engine idling, 2 figures inside who didn't get out. It was the 3rd night in a row I'd seen that same car parked in the same spot, always when I closed up. I thought it was strange for half a second, thought it was something at the laundromat, forgot about it. I looked both ways, pulled my coat tight against me, and tried to remember what he'd said. Chicago's been loud. I quickened my pace toward my father's house without understanding why. Chapter 4. Scissors and Rumor. Saturday started like any end-of-the-month Saturday. Late clients, urgent hems, Dahlia laughing at a pumpkin orange formal dress an older woman had sent in to be shortened 3 times. I left the studio for last. I sent Dahlia home at 6, closed out the register, swept the floor, turned off the front light. The smell of the whole day was trapped in the air. Cotton scorched by the iron, reheated coffee, the cheap lavender of the hand soap. The back door opened onto a narrow alley that connected the main street to the service entrance of the laundromat next door. I'd crossed that alley 1,000 times. That night, I crossed it 999. I had the key in the outer lock when I heard footsteps. 2 men, long coats. One held a lit cigarette between his fingers. The other walked with his hand inside his pocket in a way that wasn't about the cold. It was about weight. I'm a seamstress. I recognize what makes the wrong bulge in fabric. That pocket had the wrong bulge. Miss Vane, said the one with the cigarette. I didn't answer. I squeezed the key between my fingers and tried to remember where I'd put the scissors. A panicked seamstress's head doesn't go for the door. It goes for the scissors. Apron pocket. Right side. Big fabric scissors. 15-centimeter blade. Sharp point that my mother sharpened every Sunday morning before the market. We're going to take a little walk, the man went on. Calm. The way of someone who'd said that line many times. Quietly. I don't know you, sir, I said, but Mr. de Vera knows us. Move. The second man's hand came over my mouth before I could scream. It was fast. It was strong. I caught the smell of bad tobacco and leather and sweat on the cloth of his sleeve. He pulled me by the elbow toward the car parked at the mouth of the alley. Black, engine running, an invisible driver behind the tinted glass. The hum of the engine bounced off the brick walls of the alley and came back without echo, as if even the air were afraid to make a sound. It was the hand on my mouth that decided me. I slipped the other one into the apron pocket. My fingers found the scissor ring the way they'd found the ring every day for 7 years. I closed my fingers. Pulled. I didn't think. I drove it in. The blade went into the thigh of the man with the cigarette, at a crooked angle, high up, and I felt his coat fabric give before I felt flesh. He shouted. The cigarette dropped, burned the ground. The hand let go of my mouth for half a second. You, he snarled. I didn't wait for the rest. I yanked the scissors out, stepped back 2 steps, screamed loud, screamed with the voice I hadn't used in years. Help! The second man grabbed me by the arm. The scissors slipped from my hand and hit the cobblestones with a metallic sound I'll never forget. He lifted me half a foot off the ground. I kicked. I hit his shin. He cursed. That was the second the headlights arrived. Lucian's car tore into the alley with the calculated violence of someone who'd already been on the block. The same dark car I'd been noticing on the street for days, now making sense too late. I saw the lights flood the wall, saw the man holding me turn his head on instinct, and saw Maddox getting out of the driver's seat with a calm that was worse than urgency. Lucian came out the passenger side. I won't describe what happened in the next 20 seconds, because I didn't see all of it myself. I saw the barrel of a gun. I saw Maddox driving the man with the cigarette down against the wall with one knee. I saw Lucian seizing the second man's wrist in a way that made the man let go of my arm before any order was given. I heard a bone make a sound that wasn't a bone breaking. It was a bone warning that it would break if it didn't obey. "Get in the car," Lucian told me. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the man. "The scissors," I said stupidly. "Get in the car, Emily." It was the first time he'd said my name like that. Low, exact, no room for argument. I obeyed. I picked the scissors up off the ground, wrapped them in the hem of my apron so I wouldn't stain my skirt, and walked to the car on legs trembling in a way I didn't know legs could tremble. Maddox got in after. Lucian last. No one said a word during the short drive back to the studio, because it was back to the studio that he took me. Not home, not to a hospital, not to his penthouse. The studio, the back door, low light, the same door I'd locked half an hour earlier. Lucian unlocked it with a key I didn't see where it had come from. He guided me inside with a hand at the small of my back that had more care than hurry. Maddox stayed at the door, his back to us, watching the alley. "Sit," Lucian said. I sat on the wooden stool, the same stool he'd sat on 2 days earlier, licking the tip of a black thread. The wood was cold through the thin fabric of my dress, and I held onto the edge with the hand that still worked. He knelt on the studio floor. The dawn of Chicago, $8,000 suit, knee on the worn floorboards of my studio. He took my hand. I hadn't even realized I was bleeding. The scissors had cut my palm when they slipped. A thin cut, deep enough. The blood had drawn a crooked line down to my wrist and dried there. "Where's the gauze?" he asked. "Counter drawer. Second one." He got up, came back with the first aid kit I didn't even know had fresh gauze. He knelt again. He cleaned the cut with alcohol without warning me. I clenched my jaw to keep from yelling. The smell of alcohol rose strong, metallic, mixed with the warm smell of fresh fabric from the shelves. "You should have warned me. You would have tensed up." "I'm already tense." He looked at me from below, still kneeling, and there was something in his eye I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't control. It was fear. Bare fear. No disguise. The kind a man like him shouldn't have been able to feel. "You could have died," he said, low. "I didn't." "You could have." "I didn't, Lucian." It was the first time I'd said his name. He stopped with the gauze halfway across my palm. He looked at my hand. He went on. But something in his shoulders gave way half a finger, like a poorly fastened seam coming loose without a sound. He wrapped the gauze around the palm with steady fingers, tied it, checked, let go of my hand without really letting go. He kept the tips of his fingers touching mine for a second longer than necessary. It was the first time those hands had touched me without armor. I felt the warmth before I realized I was feeling it. "Lucian," I said. "Yes." "Is all of this debt?" He raised his face. "What?" "The roof. My father's job. You showing up here tonight in time. You knowing where I work, where I live, what time I close. Is this debt for the night at the laundromat?" He was quiet for a long time. He stood up from the floor, sat in the other chair, the client's chair, across from me, rested his elbows on his knees. His hands hung loose in the space between us, as if he didn't know what to do with them anymore. "I can't tell debt and choice apart anymore, Emily. Try. I try every day. And I'm afraid of the answer." The sentence hung in the air between us. I looked at my bandaged hand. I looked at the floor where 2 minutes earlier the scissors had fallen. I looked at the back door that had been the door of a trap. I didn't answer. The studio made that small sound old buildings make at night, a beam settling, the wall clock 2 minutes slow, counting the wrong time. It was in that silence that Maddox knocked on the front door. Lucian stood up, went to answer. They exchanged 3 sentences I couldn't make out. When Lucian came back, his face had changed. "What is it?" I asked. "A rumor." "What rumor?" He pinched the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. "Miss Morkan has been in 3 salons today telling anyone who'd listen that you're my paid mistress. That I paid for the brooch, paid for the dress, paid for the father." I closed my eyes. "My father is going to hear it. He already has." I opened my eyes. "How?" "Maddox passed by his house on the way here. Your father was at the gate. A neighbor next door was telling him." I felt my throat close. Not because of the salons, not because of the city, because of my father. My father, who had worked his whole life in silence, who had buried my mother without enough money for a proper coffin, who had accepted the roof without asking, who had accepted the job without asking. My father didn't deserve to hear that from a neighbor's mouth at the gate. "I'm going home," I said. "Maddox will drive you." "I'm going home now." "Maddox will drive you now." I stood up. My legs still trembled. I pressed the gauze against my palm. Lucian caught up with me at the door. He didn't touch me. He just stood one step behind, with his coat open, the street light coming in through the unlocked door. I could hear him breathing behind me, shorter than he wanted it to be, closer than it should have been. "Emily." "What?" "I can fix this 2 ways." "Which ways? Mine or yours?" "What's the difference?" "In mine, Selena shuts up before breakfast. In yours, you speak up at the next Bella Vita ball, in front of the same people who laughed, and you throw back what she threw in your face. I lean against a column, and don't say a word." I looked at him for a long second. I searched his eyes for some shadow of impatience, of a Don used to deciding for other people. I didn't find it. I only found waiting. "Mine. Are you sure?" "Yes. You know mine is faster. Yours is faster. Mine is more mine." He didn't smile, but there was a relaxing in the line of his shoulder that I recognized as approval. "Next Saturday," he said. "I'll pick you up, Lucian." "Yes. If you're lying about anything, about debt, about choice, about what this is, it's better to kill the truth now, before I walk into that ballroom on your arm again, because this time I won't be able to go back to sewing in silence." He stood still on the threshold. The streetlight came in across his shoulders and died at my feet. Maddox waited in the car with the engine running, and the low beam drew a yellow corridor on the wet sidewalk. "I'm not lying," Lucian answered slowly. "I'm hiding, and that's different, and I'll tell you the difference before Saturday. It wasn't an answer. It was the promise of an answer. I accepted it because I didn't have energy left to argue, and because the palm of my hand was starting to throb again, in slow pulses that beat along with my heart. I went out, got in the car. Maddox drove without saying a word. In the rearview mirror, I saw Lucian standing in the studio doorway, coat open, watching the car go down the street until it turned the corner. He didn't move. He was the most still figure I'd ever seen, and even so, it felt like he was following me from the other side of the glass. When I got home, my father was sitting in the kitchen. There was no light on, only the small lamp above the stove, the one my mother used to read recipes by at night. The smell of cold coffee in his mug squeezed my chest before any word was spoken. He looked up. He'd been crying. He didn't hide it. "Sweetheart. Dad. Is it true?" "What?" "What the neighbor said." I sat down in the chair across from him. I rested my bandaged hand on the table where he could see it. I looked at the man who had taught me to sew before anyone else in this world. "No, Dad. It's not true. But there's a true part to it that I still need to understand. And when I understand, I'll tell you all of it." He looked at my hand. He looked at my face. He reached his out and covered mine over the gauze. His palm was rough at the spot my mother always said was the map of his life. "You always tell me all of it, sweetheart. Always." That was all he asked of me. That was all I promised. I went up to my room. I took off the bloody apron. I set the scissors on top of the dresser, next to the black diamond brooch wrapped in the handkerchief. The two objects shone in different ways in the faint lamplight. One with the gleam of used steel, the other with the gleam of a stone that had never done a day's work in its life. I looked at them both for a long time. I thought that a good seamstress knows when fabric will hold a seam and when it will tear down the middle. I thought I still didn't know which of the two Lucian was. Next Saturday, I'd find out. Chapter 5. The Queen Enters Again. The afternoon dragged like a badly pulled thread. I was in my father's kitchen, barefoot on the cold floor, ironing a dark blue dress I'd sewn myself during the week, stitch by stitch, by the faint light of the studio after closing. The fabric smelled of coconut soap and hot iron, and it had that new stiffness of cloth that had never been worn. It was simple. No lace, no shine, no desperate attempt to look like something else. It was mine, and that was enough. On the chipped wooden table, in a small box lined with worn velvet, the black diamond brooch was waiting for me as if it knew everything. The yellow light of the kitchen single bulb hit it and threw back a dark, almost liquid sheen that seemed to breathe when I moved. I avoided looking directly at it. It was like staring at a promise before its time. "Are you going down like that?" my father asked from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, an old jacket folded over his arm, eyes tired with the look of a man who hadn't slept much. Since the rumor Selena had spread, he'd been walking with his shoulders pulled in, as if shame were something you carried in the body. I recognized that walk. I had inherited it from him for years. I'm going down like this, I said, smoothing the fabric. Tonight, the one who needs to hide her face isn't me. He looked at me for a long while. Then he crossed the kitchen, picked up the little box, and opened it with that careful way he had with other people's things. The small hinges gave a soft click. He took out the brooch, waited for me to lift my chin, and pinned it himself to the neckline of the blue dress. His hand shook a little. Mine didn't. I felt the cold metal touch my skin above the collarbone, and then warm slowly, as if the brooch were deciding whether it would stay. Your mother, he said, low, would love to be seeing you right now. I swallowed the urge to cry before it could climb to my eyes. That wasn't a night for smeared makeup. It was a night not to smear anything. I breathed through my nose, slowly, counting to 3, the way she had taught me when I was small and afraid of the dark. The car came on time. Maddox opened the door without saying good evening. He just said, with his head slightly tilted, Miss Vane, and I noticed he no longer used the tone of someone carrying a fragile package. He used the tone of someone carrying a person. The smell of new leather inside the car wrapped around me as soon as I got in, along with the discreet, woodsy scent of his cologne. Lucian was inside, well-cut black coat, hand resting on his knee as if he'd been counting the seconds until he saw me. When he saw me, something hard in his face gave way for an instant, and came back the next instant, controlled, but I saw it. It was like watching a crack open and close in a steel door. Beautiful, he said simply, no flourish. Functional, I shot back. The corner of his mouth lifted 0.5 millimeter. Maddox kept his eyes on the road, fingers firm on the wheel. No visible reaction. You set the pace in there, Lucian said as the car glided through Chicago's dark streets, streetlights passing in yellow bands across the window. If you want me to speak, I speak. If you want me to just be there, I just am. If you want me to leave the room, I leave. I'll want you to be quiet, I said. For the first time in your life, let someone speak loudly near you. He tilted his head in a gesture that was almost reverence. Maddox, in the rearview mirror, let out a discreet, "If you say so, sir," that pulled an involuntary half-smile from me. Lucian shot a look at the back of the driver's head, but didn't correct him. It was the first time I'd seen anyone mock him and get away with it. The Bella Vita mansion was glowing the same way it had the week before. The same heavy curtains, the same crystal in the chandeliers, the same smell of expensive perfume mixed with warm champagne and floor wax. The difference was that this time, I was the one who decided when to walk in. Lucian offered his arm at the top of the staircase. I placed my hand without having to think about where each finger went. I felt the fabric of his coat under my palm, firm, and the warmth of his arm beneath. Under my hand, his pulse beat at a rhythm all its own, slow, certain, as if his heart, too, obeyed. The ballroom took 3 seconds to notice, then it stopped. It was like watching an entire clock seize up at once. Selena was at the center, red dress on display, glass raised in the middle of some joke. When she saw me, the glass came down an inch. Then it came down all the way. The platinum friend, beside her, opened her mouth to speak before thinking. I walked closer, unhurried. Lucian let go of my arm on purpose 3 steps away, and stood behind me, hands crossed in front of him, leaning against a column like a man who watches and doesn't participate. "Good evening, cousin," I said. My voice trembled on the first word. It trembled on the second, too. I heard myself, and almost stepped back. I pressed the brooch with the tip of my finger, set my nail against the cold metal, and waited for my breath to return. "Emily," Selena smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. What a pleasant surprise. It's not a surprise. A few heads turned. An older woman with a high bun lowered her fan. A waiter froze in the middle of the room holding a tray of empty glasses. "I came," I went on, voice still low, "to return something." I took off the thin bracelet she'd clasped around my wrist on the day of the first ball. The clasp gave without resistance. I set it on a paralyzed waiter's tray. "Emily, you're—" Selena began. "I'm not done." My voice came out firmer now. I surprised myself. The mustard dress was already stained before it got to my hands. The shoe was 2 sizes too small. The makeup ran on purpose. You know all of that because you arranged it. The platinum friend stepped forward, finger already raised. "Darling, this is ridiculous. Last time you touched my chin," I cut in. "You said I should hide my face. People laughed." The room held its breath. I breathed with it, deeply, and only then did my voice steady for real. "It was never about my face. It was about my voice. And you made my father cry in the kitchen over a rumor you invented." The platinum friend took 1/2 step back. The Bella Vita hostess, standing near the piano, had her hand to her mouth. Her fingers trembled slightly over her own lips. "I didn't come here to call any of you anything," I finished. "I came to return your shame to you. It's yours. It always was. I had only agreed to keep it for you." The silence lasted too long to be comfortable for anyone there, except me. I felt the brooch rise and fall with my breath, and it was the only warm thing in the entire ballroom. The first to move was the woman with the high bun. She set her fan down on a side table with a dry click, turned her back on Selena, and walked away. Then another. Then a whole couple, arm in arm, without exchanging a word. The circle around my cousin opened the way fabric gives stitch by stitch. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. Selena was left standing in the middle of the room holding a glass that no longer served any purpose. Lucian peeled himself off the column. He crossed the distance unhurriedly, offered his arm again. I took it. We walked out through the side door, the same one I'd used to flee the week before, except this time no one laughed behind my back. The terrace was empty. The night, cold. The same air smelling of damp jasmine. The same stone balustrade cracked in one corner. The same dark garden below where the fountains were still running in a distant whisper. Everything the same, and nothing the same. Lucian didn't speak right away. He took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders before I asked. The weight and the warmth settled on me with his scent caught in the lining. Cedar, paper, something metallic I never managed to name. He stood beside me, elbows on the stone, looking out at the garden as if there were something interesting beyond the shadows. "You didn't say anything in there," I said, without looking at him. "You didn't need me to. You would have silenced everyone if I'd asked." "I would have. Why didn't you?" He took his time answering. His fingers drummed once on the stone and stopped. "Because I wanted to watch you win on your own." His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. "Because a victory borrowed from me wouldn't have been any use to you tomorrow." I swallowed. The brooch felt heavy on my chest in a new way. Not the weight of debt, the weight of a medal. "You promised to tell me something before the ball," I reminded him. He turned his face, not toward me, inward, first, then toward me. It was almost possible to see the path between the two movements. "My father," he began, "did things I found out about too late, things I'm still dismantling. When I tell you I'm afraid of becoming him, it's because I know how easy it is. You make one decision without asking, and you tell yourself you're protecting. You make two decisions, and you tell yourself you're taking care. You make decisions for a lifetime, and when you look back, you've become him." I pulled his coat tighter around my shoulders. The fabric was heavy, lined, and it cut the cold at the back of my neck. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know before I ask you for anything." He turned his body to face me. "I'm not going to ask you for anything tonight. I just wanted you to hear this part with the brooch on your chest, after you'd spoken loudly, and not before." I looked at him. Really looked. The most dangerous man in Chicago had a strand of hair out of place, and a small scar on his left eyebrow I'd never noticed, thin as a stroke of white thread. He slept little, he spoke less than he needed to, and he had just handed me back, without asking for anything in return, control of a conversation he could have dominated in 3 sentences. "I'm not going to promise to forgive," I said, "what I don't even know all of yet. I'm not asking, but I promise to listen to the rest. When you can tell me." He let out a breath like a man releasing a weight he'd been carrying for hours, maybe for years. His shoulders dropped a centimeter no one besides me would have seen. His hand rose slowly. His fingers brushed my temple, swept aside a strand of hair that had fallen over my eye, came down along the line of my jaw without quite touching. They stopped there, a breath away. I felt the warmth of his palm before the skin, as if the air between us had turned into something else. "May I?" he asked, and it was that word, may, that undid me. Chapter 6. The Door and the Morning. His finger stopped a millimeter from my face. "May I?" Lucian repeated, and his voice came out rougher than the first time. I didn't answer with a word. I tipped my chin, and that was it. His fingers came down along the line of my jaw like a man memorizing a path he was going to have to know with his eyes closed. The Bella Vita terrace was still there. The sound of the ballroom filtered through the glass wall, the cold air slipping into the short sleeve of the blue dress I'd sewn myself. Inside, a waltz started, muffled, as if played underwater. Everything kept going. Only I had stopped. He came closer slowly, one shoulder cocked against the balustrade so I could step back if I wanted. I didn't want to. The kiss came without hurry, the way he had told me he'd do everything with me from then on, a mouth that asked permission before it took, and only took what was offered. I tasted the faint taste of expensive whiskey, and of a night that had started with trembling, and was ending with decision. His hand rose to my nape, fingers spread, the pressure firm and careful at once. When he pulled away, he kept his forehead against mine a second longer than he needed to. "Are you sure you want to be with me?" he asked. And this time it wasn't irony. It wasn't a game. Not as debt, as a choice. I drew in a deep breath. The black diamond brooch weighed on my chest like a small bell. "I choose," I said, "but with rules. Tell me, you don't decide for me, ever again. I won't. You knock on the door like a normal person. I knock. You don't buy other people's silence to protect me." He hesitated for half a second. "A man used to buying the silence of the entire world with a signature. I won't buy it," he said, and the word came out whole. "And when I ask, you tell me the truth. The whole truth, not the polished version. The whole truth," he repeated low. "Even when it hurts me." I looked at him, the most feared man in Chicago, agreeing, without negotiating, to the rules of a seamstress in a homemade blue dress. It was funny, and it was frightening, and it was both at once. "Then," I said, "let's leave this ball." He laughed quietly. It was a short sound, surprised at its own existence, as if his throat didn't quite know how to produce it. "You're in charge. I'm learning." He offered his arm. I hooked mine through it. We came down the terrace's side staircase straight into the garden, and this time no one laughed. No one touched my chin. No one needed his line whispered low in Selena's ear. Through the tall window I glimpsed the platinum friend with her champagne glass paralyzed in the air halfway to her mouth. Selena wasn't in sight. Someone said later that she'd left through the kitchen, and I didn't even turn to confirm it. Maddox was standing beside the armored car, his gaze straight ahead as if he didn't see us. He opened the back door. Lucian waited for me to get in first, walked around the car to the other side, sat down. Maddox closed the partition. Not all the way. A finger's width of gap. Maybe out of courtesy. Maybe because he didn't trust anyone enough to go deaf. The car glided down the avenue. Lucian took my hand. He didn't lace our fingers. He laid my open hand over his palm, the way a man weighs something fragile to understand its size. His thumb traced the white band of skin on my palm, the thin scar from the scissors cut, still new. His skin was warm and rough at the exact point where there should have been a callus from a man who lifts heavy things. "You know I might still not fully trust you," I said, looking out the window. "I know. And choosing to stay isn't the same as forgetting. I know that too. I just want to make it clear. It's clear." He lifted my hand to his mouth. He kissed my closed palm, right on top of the scar. It was acknowledgement, just like that. Through the gap in the partition, Maddox cleared his throat with a fake cough. Lucian smiled out of the corner of his mouth. "Maddox, sir, we're fine. If you say so, sir." I laughed without meaning to, hand to my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound. Lucian looked at me like a man saving the sound to use later, in a bad moment. The car stopped at the entrance to the penthouse building. We got out together. The elevator climbed in silence, numbers changing in faint green on the panel. Lucian pressed a button, and the panel obeyed without blinking, and I thought it must be a strange thing to live in a world where even machines were afraid of you. The penthouse door. He turned the key, pushed. He looked at me one last time. "May I?" he asked again, hand extended. I took his hand. I walked in. The door closed behind us with the low sound of heavy wood settling into the frame. He kissed me again. The lights in the living room went out. The bedroom door closed. Ananai. I woke up first. Light came in through the tall window in a wide, lazy band, crossed the rug, and stopped at the foot of the bed. It took me a second to figure out where I was. A heavy sheet, the scent of cedar in the pillow, a warm weight against my back, breathing in a slow rhythm I'd never heard from him before. Lucian was asleep. Really asleep. Mouth slightly open, heavy arm across my waist, brow smooth for the first time since I'd known his face. I lay still for a while, just looking. The most feared man in Chicago had the face of a boy when he slept, and that was too much information for one day. I noticed the thin scar on his eyebrow, the darker line beneath his eye, the mark of badly slept nights that were now at rest. I slid his arm off me carefully. He mumbled something into the pillow, rolled onto his side, kept sleeping. I put on the first shirt I saw, one of his white ones, too big, falling to mid-thigh, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The wooden floor was cold. The hallway smelled of coffee that hadn't been made yet, as if the house were waiting for the gesture. The kitchen was too big for one person, with a dark stone countertop and a gleaming metal toaster in the corner. I found the coffee in a glass jar. I found the coffee maker. I pressed the wrong 2 buttons before I got the right one. When the first drop fell, the strong smell rose up and reminded me of the studio early in the morning, and I smiled to myself for no reason. I put 2 slices of bread into the toaster, pushed the lever down, went to get butter from the fridge, a fridge so organized it looked more like a magazine spread than a man's home. When I turned, the toast popped up black. The smell of burning took over the kitchen. Great, I muttered. At least it wasn't me this time. Lucian was at the door, barefoot, pajama pants loose at the hip, plain gray t-shirt, hair like a man who'd slept deeply. His eyes traveled across the scene, me in his shirt, coffee dripping, black toast on the counter, and he paused in the doorway a second longer than he needed to. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing. How is it nothing?" He walked toward me, barefoot on the cold floor, and stopped close without touching. I felt the warmth of his body a hand's width from my shoulder. "I've never had a morning like this," he said. "That's all." "With burned toast?" "With anyone." I swallowed. I handed him a cup. He took it, leaned against the counter beside me, shoulder against shoulder. We stayed quiet for a while, drinking black coffee and looking at the light through the window. The steam rose between us in white wisps. "Emily." The brooch was mine to give. He spoke slowly, as if each item were a box he was opening for me. I pinned it on, knowing what I was doing. I took it off my own chest because it was the fastest way to make every person in that ballroom understand the size of the mistake they'd made with you. I know. The roof was mine. I sent 2 men I trust up before dawn. I didn't leave a note because I figured you'd refuse. You figured right. Your father's job. I called myself. I didn't ask a favor. I reminded the person of an old favor he owed me. I looked at him. His cup had stopped halfway to his mouth. And the rest? He took a deep breath. His chest rose slowly under the gray t-shirt. There is a rest. Not all of it at once. Not because I don't want to tell you, but because some things I myself still need to understand out loud before I dump them in your lap. Can I tell you a little at a time? No secrets. Just not all at once. It was a request, not a decision. You can, I said, but if I ask you directly, you answer. I answer, even if it's something you wanted never to tell me. Even then, I took another sip of coffee. The phone buzzed on the counter. Mine. Forgotten there since the night before. I looked at the screen. Dad. I picked up. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, sweetheart." "You didn't sleep at home." I didn't. Silence on the other end. Lucian beside me didn't pretend not to be listening. He stayed there, respectful, waiting, cup held in both hands. "Are you all right?" my father asked. "I am." "Are you with him?" "I am." Another silence. Brief. "Come for lunch," he said. "There's fish." "I'll come. Bring him if you want." I looked at Lucian. He'd heard. He raised half an eyebrow. My father had met Lucian before, of course. Twice at the lake house, at a quiet dinner where the 2 men exchanged fewer words than the salt and the pepper. But it was the first time my father had really invited him. "Not today, Dad," I answered. "Another day. It has to be at the right time." "All right, sweetheart." I hung up, set the phone on the counter. Lucian didn't comment. He took another slice of bread, put it in the toaster, pressed the lever like a man challenging an old machine. "I'm going to try again," he said. "It's going to burn. It's going to burn." It burned. We laughed together quietly, and the laugh was the newest thing about the whole morning. Chatter. We went out together in the late morning. Maddox was waiting in the car downstairs. Lucian walked me to the door of the building, hand on my waist, jacket over the wrinkled blue dress from the night before. Before I got into the car, I turned. "I'm taking the bus." He frowned. "I can drop you at the studio." "You can, but today I want to take the bus." He looked at me for a second. I saw the reflection of the man who was going to want to insist, and I saw the reflection of him swallowing the impulse. He nodded. "See you there at the end of the day? Knock on the door." "I'll knock." He leaned in and kissed my forehead. Not my mouth. My forehead. And that was the part that disarmed me the most. The bus came 3 minutes later. I got on, paid the fare, sat near the window. The city paraded gray and noisy on the other side of the glass, shop windows blinking, hurried people clattering on the asphalt, damp with fine drizzle. I rested my head against the glass and closed my eyes for just an instant. The glass vibrated slowly with the rhythm of the engine. When I opened them, my fingers were touching the black diamond brooch pinned to the chest of the blue dress. The dark stone caught the morning's faint light and threw it back in tiny points, like sparks trapped inside glass. That was when the thought passed. It was quick. It didn't hurt. It just passed, the way a bird's shadow passes over the ground on a bright day. How had he recognized me so quickly on that terrace? It had been minutes, in a dark laundromat, with blood on his face, months ago, and he had known, at the first glance on the Bella Vita terrace, that it was me, without hesitating. Without blinking twice to confirm, I smiled to myself at the window. I pushed the thought away. The bus went down one street, up another. The studio appeared at the end of the block. Narrow facade, fogged glass. I got off with the brooch shining on my chest. No weight at all. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. The wall of our house gave way, and there, in the middle of the old plaster, I found the truth Lucien de Vera had never had the courage to hand me. I was living a piece too beautiful to be real. Strong coffee, secret notes, words of love whispered into the breeze, his scent in the kitchen. Until the day the worker's sledgehammer broke open the wall of the office, old documents dropped at my feet. Photos of me, of my mother, of my friends, reports with my name, signed orders, and recent notes in Lucien's handwriting. Keep Emily under surveillance. Use emotional bond as containment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked up the box, locked the bedroom door, and spent the night reading every line. It was there I understood, with my chest bleeding. I hadn't been protected. I had been hunted, manipulated, and turned into a piece in a game Lucien had planned before I even knew his name. He said he was protecting me, but the danger had never been outside. The danger had been sleeping beside me. I left the mansion that same night, suitcase in hand, heart in pieces, but I didn't leave Chicago. I went to a rented room in Brooklyn, opened my mother's notebook, and started writing down names. I built a plan. Now, Lucien de Vera is going to find out what happens when the woman he used as a shield decides to become the blade. Now he's burning his own empire down, trying to get me back. But I've already started burning his from the inside. Because love doesn't erase manipulation. And when I finish understanding just how far I was used, not even the most powerful mob boss in Chicago will be able to bear the weight of my revenge.